The sound of ceramic hitting ceramic rang out sharp as gunfire in the briefing room at the Navy SEAL compound in Virginia Beach. Ivy Sterling flinched, her hands trembling as she set the coffee tray down on the polished oak table. The scar running from her right wrist all the way up to her elbow showed stark and pale under the fluorescent lights. "Good grief, look at that." Connor Reed, a 27-year-old SEAL who'd finished Bud S just 3 months ago, pointed directly at Ivy's arm. "They let just anybody in here now!" Laughter erupted from the 3 men in navy blue shirts clustered around the tactical table. Ivy lowered her head, her grip on the tray tightening until her knuckles went white. She stepped backward toward the door, but Mason Blake, the demolitions expert with an arrogant smirk, moved to block her path. "Hold on a second." Mason crossed his arms, looking Ivy up and down, like she was a piece of equipment he was evaluating. "How long have you worked here?" "A week, 2 weeks." 6 days, sir." Ivy's voice came out barely above a whisper. 6 days. Ethan Hayes, the communications specialist, repeated the words with mockery dripping from every syllable. "And they let you serve in the briefing room with hands that shake like that?" Lieutenant Bradley Morrison, the team leader with over 5 years in the teams, rose from his chair. His eyes swept over Ivy like he was assessing a target. "You do know this is a restricted area, right? Only for personnel with proper clearance." "Yes, sir." Ivy kept her gaze on the floor. "I have my badge." "A coffee service badge." Connor laughed. "Not a warrior badge." But in the corner of the room, Senior Chief Matthew Sullivan, a 50-year-old man with 35 years of service under his belt, narrowed his eyes. He noticed the way Ivy stood, the way she'd automatically identified every exit in the room, the way her eyes scanned the space not like a frightened service worker, but like an operator assessing a threat environment. They had no idea what was about to happen in the next 20 minutes. No idea how everything they thought they knew about strength, about scars, about the trembling woman standing before them was about to change forever. Ivy set down the remaining cups with deliberate care, each movement slow and controlled. Connor watched her with barely concealed disgust, exchanging glances with Mason and Ethan. The 3 of them had formed a tight circle since graduating Bud S together, and they carried themselves with the swagger of men who believed they had earned the right to judge everyone around them. "Make sure you clean up when you're done," Bradley said, his tone dismissive as he turned back to the tactical map spread across the table. "We have actual work to do here." The words landed like a physical blow, but Ivy simply nodded. She picked up the empty tray and turned toward the door. As she moved, Connor deliberately shifted his weight, causing a stack of classified folders to slide off the edge of the table. Papers scattered across the floor in a wide arc. "Oops." Connor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Better pick those up." Ivy hesitated for just a fraction of a second before setting down her tray. She crouched to gather the papers, and Matthew Sullivan sat up straighter in his chair. Because Ivy didn't just bend down. She moved into a perfect military squat, back straight, knees bent at the proper angle, weight distributed evenly. It was the kind of posture that took years of training to make automatic. The papers in her hands were tactical maps covered in markings and coordinates. As Ivy straightened, her eyes caught on one of them for just a moment too long. "Do you even know what you're looking at?" Bradley asked, his tone challenging. Ivy's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Helmand Province, sir." The room went silent for 3 full seconds. Bradley's eyebrows rose, and Ethan leaned forward in his chair. "Lucky guess," Mason said, but there was a new edge to his voice, something that hadn't been there before. Ivy handed the folders back to Connor without meeting his eyes and returned to her tray. As she lifted it, Mason reached across the table for his water bottle and knocked it over. Ice-cold water splashed directly onto Ivy's hands and forearms. She jerked back reflexively, the tray tilting dangerously. For a split second, her body moved with the fluid precision of someone trained to react to threats. She pulled into a defensive stance, the tray dropped, but her hands shot out and caught it inches before it hit the ground. The reaction time was impossibly fast. Too fast for someone who was supposed to be just a civilian coffee service worker. Matthew Sullivan leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Ivy. He'd seen that kind of reflexive response before, but only in one kind of person. He made a mental note saying nothing. "Sorry about that," Mason said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "You should probably be more careful." Ivy straightened, water dripping from her hands. Yes, sir. Hey, quick question, Connor said, pushing back from the table with a scrape of chair legs against floor. You know anything about weapons? Ivy didn't respond, focusing instead on wiping the water off the tray with a cloth napkin. Ethan pointed at the M4 carbine mock-up mounted on the wall, part of the room's standard equipment displays. Bet you don't even know what that is. Ivy's eyes flicked to the weapon for less than a second. Her lips pressed together, and for a moment it seemed like she wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly that the men had to strain to hear her, she said, M4 carbine, sir. Effective range 500 meters. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence had weight to it. Bradley stared at Ivy with new intensity. Mason's smirk faded. Connor exchanged a confused glance with Ethan. Lucky guess, Bradley finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. The door opened, and Lieutenant Charlotte Warner entered. She was a 30-year-old intelligence officer with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took in the scene with a single sweep of her gaze, the scattered papers, the water on the table, Ivy standing with her head down, and her hands still dripping the 4 seals arranged around her like wolves circling prey. Charlotte's expression remained neutral, but her eyes lingered on Ivy for a moment, longer than necessary. Something about the woman's posture, about the way she held herself, despite the obvious humiliation, struck Charlotte as odd. Gentlemen, Charlotte said crisply, Commander Cross needs those threat assessments by 1400 hours. We're working on it, Bradley replied. He gestured dismissively at Ivy. Just dealing with a small distraction. Charlotte's gaze sharpened, but she said nothing. She moved to her desk in the corner and opened her laptop, seemingly focused on her work. But she was watching. Always watching. Ivy moved toward the door again, but Mason stepped into her path. You don't belong here, he said, his voice low and hard. You understand that, right? This is a place for warriors, not for... He gestured vaguely at her trembling hands, at the scars on her arm. Not for whatever you are. He reached out as if to push her toward the door. Ivy sidestepped. It was a small movement, economical and precise. Too precise. Mason's hand met empty air, and he stumbled, slightly thrown off balance by the miss. The sidestep had been executed with the kind of spatial awareness that came from extensive combat training. Matthew Sullivan's eyes narrowed further. He set down his coffee cup, slowly, deliberately, his full attention now fixed on the interaction unfolding before him. The door opened again, and this time, Captain Samuel Mitchell entered. He was 48 years old, the base commander, and his presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Every SEAL straightened slightly, even if they didn't come to full attention. What's going on here? Captain Mitchell's voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. Nothing, sir, Bradley said quickly. Just civilian staff. She was just finishing up. Captain Mitchell looked at Ivy, then at the 4 SEALs, then at the water still pooling on the table. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Let her finish her job, he said quietly. Then to Bradley. And you 4 might want to remember that respect isn't just for people who wear the same uniform you do. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Connor's face flushed red. Bradley's expression went carefully blank. Mason looked down at his boots. Captain Mitchell held the door open, a clear gesture for Ivy to leave. She picked up her tray and walked toward him, head still down, shoulders hunched inward. But as she passed the tactical table, her hand shot out to catch a pen that had started to roll off the edge. She caught it with her left hand while balancing the tray with her right, the ambidextrous coordination so smooth it seemed effortless. Matthew Sullivan sat forward in his chair. That kind of bilateral coordination didn't come naturally. It was trained, drilled, perfected through thousands of hours of practice. Ivy set the pen back on the table and left the room without another word. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Get back to work, Captain Mitchell said to the 4 SEALs, his tone making it clear the discussion was over. He left, but the tension in the room remained thick enough to cut. Before we continue with what happens next, if you're feeling that same anger, I am right now. Watching someone get judged just by their appearance, hit that subscribe button. Because this story is about to take a turn that'll make you question everything you think you know about strength. And trust me, you won't want to miss a single second of what these SEALs are about to discover. This channel brings you real stories about real people who prove that warriors don't always look like what you'd expect. Now, back to Ivy's story. Connor waited until the door had been closed for a full minute before speaking. What was that about? She got lucky with a couple answers. So, what? I don't know, Ethan said, slowly pulling out his phone. But that thing about Helmand Province, that's not common knowledge, and the M4's effective range. Most civilians would have said 300 meters because that's what you see in movies. She probably had a boyfriend in the service or something, Mason said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Picked up some terminology. Bradley said nothing. He was staring at the door where Ivy had exited, his expression thoughtful. Something about the woman bothered him, and not in the way he'd expected. It wasn't her weakness that bothered him. It was something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Charlotte Warner, still at her desk, typed quietly on her laptop. She'd accessed the personnel database and pulled up Ivy Sterling's file. It was thin, suspiciously thin. Civilian employee hired 6 days ago through a standard contractor agency. Previous employment, various administrative and service positions. No military background listed. No family members in the service. Nothing that would explain the casual accuracy with which she'd identified military equipment and locations. Charlotte made a note in her personal files and continued digging. The next morning came with the sharp clarity of a winter dawn. Ivy arrived at the compound at 0600 hours. Her movements quiet as she unlocked the break room and began her daily routine. She set up the coffee station, wiped down the counters, arranged the cups in precise rows. Every movement was methodical, careful, designed to avoid drawing attention. The break room door swung open, and Petty Officer Ryan Foster walked in. He was 25, newer to the teams, but with a reputation for being observant and fair-minded. He nodded at Ivy politely. "Morning." "Good morning, sir," Ivy replied, keeping her eyes on the coffee machine. Ryan set his gear bag on the table and began cleaning his M9 pistol, a routine maintenance task. He disassembled it with practiced ease, laying out the parts on a cloth. As he reached for the cleaning solvent, his elbow caught the slide assembly. It skittered off the table, followed by the barrel and recoil spring parts scattering across the floor. "Ah, great," Ryan muttered, crouching down to gather the pieces. Ivy bent down to help without thinking. Her hands moved automatically, picking up the slide, the barrel, the spring guide rod. Ryan watched as she set them on the table, and then almost unconsciously she began reassembling the weapon. Her fingers moved with the kind of muscle memory that came from performing the same task hundreds, maybe thousands of times. Click. The slide locked into place. Click. The barrel dropped into position. The recoil spring compressed and seated. Her hands moved faster than Ryan could track each movement, economical and precise. 12 seconds after she'd started, the M9 was fully assembled. Ryan stared. "Where did you learn to do that?" Ivy's hands froze. Her face went pale as she realized what she'd just done. My father taught me," she stammered, setting the pistol down quickly and backing away from the table. "Your father?" Ryan's eyes narrowed. "What branch was he?" "He's passed, sir." Ivy's voice was barely audible. "I need to finish the coffee." She turned and hurried back to the counter, her movements jerky, now the smooth control gone. Ryan picked up his pistol, turning it over in his hands. The assembly was perfect. Every part seated exactly where it should be. This wasn't the work of someone whose dad had shown them how to clean a gun a few times. This was professional-level competence. The door banged open. Connor walked in, showered and dressed in PT gear, his hair still damp. He stopped when he saw Ryan holding his pistol, looking between it and Ivy, with an expression that Connor couldn't quite read. "What's going on?" Connor asked. Ryan hesitated. "Nothing, just nothing." But Connor had excellent instincts for when people were hiding something. He looked at Ivy, who was now focused intently on arranging coffee cups, her hands moving too fast, too nervously. Then he looked back at Ryan. "What did she do?" Connor demanded. "She reassembled my M9, Ryan said quietly. "In about 12 seconds. Connor's expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief. "No way." "I'm telling you, I watched her do it." Connor walked over to Ryan's table, picked up the pistol, and examined it. Then he looked at Ivy. "Hey, coffee girl, come here." Ivy's shoulders tensed, but she walked over slowly. Connor disassembled the M9 again, scattering the parts across the table with deliberate randomness. "Do it again!" "I don't think," Ivy started. "I said do it again." Connor's voice had taken on the hard edge of command. Ivy looked at Ryan, who gave her a small nod. Her hands trembled as she reached for the parts, but the moment her fingers touched the metal, something changed. The trembling stopped. Her movements became fluid, confident. Piece by piece, she rebuilt the weapon. This time, it took 10 seconds. Connor's mouth fell open. Holy cow! The door opened again, and Bradley walked in, followed by Mason and Ethan. They stopped when they saw Connor and Ryan staring at Ivy, who was standing over a fully assembled M9 with her hands still hovering above it. "What's this?" Bradley asked. "Watch," Connor said. He disassembled the pistol again faster this time. "Go!" Ivy looked like she wanted to refuse, but something in the way the 5 men were looking at her made it clear that refusal wasn't an option. She reassembled the weapon. 8 seconds. "There's no way!" Mason breathed. "There's no possible way." Bradley stepped closer, his expression intense. "Where did you really learn that?" "I told you," Ivy said, her voice small again. "My father taught me." "What was his name?" Bradley pressed. "What unit was he in?" "He passed away, sir." "I asked you what unit he was in." Ivy's jaw tightened. "I don't remember, sir. I was young." Bradley stared at her for a long moment. Every instinct he'd honed over years in special operations was screaming that something didn't add up. But before he could push further, Ivy grabbed the coffee pot and practically fled back to the counter. The 5 SEALs exchanged glances. Connor shook his head slowly. "That's not normal. That's not even close to normal." "Maybe she worked on a base somewhere," Ethan suggested. "Picked up some skills." "You don't pick that up," Ryan said firmly. "That's trained muscle memory. That takes thousands of repetitions." Bradley pulled out his phone and typed out a quick message to Charlotte Warner. "Need you to dig deeper on Ivy Sterling. Something's not right." Charlotte received the message in her office 3 buildings away. She'd already been digging, but now she dug deeper. She accessed the main personnel database, then cross-referenced with military service records. Nothing. She tried the contractor database. Nothing unusual. She even checked civilian law enforcement databases. Still nothing that would explain the level of skill they'd just witnessed. But there was something else, something that bothered her. Ivy's fingerprints had been logged into the system as part of her standard employment screening. Charlotte pulled up the fingerprint file and ran it through the broader security database, the one that included access logs for secure facilities. The search came back with a hit. Ivy Sterling's fingerprints had been logged accessing the weapons locker in Building 7, 3 years ago, before she supposedly worked here. Charlotte stared at her screen, her mind racing. Building 7's weapons locker required Tier 2 security clearance minimum. Civilian contractors didn't have that clearance, which meant either there was a mistake in the database or Ivy Sterling wasn't just a civilian contractor. Charlotte picked up her phone and called Captain Mitchell. "Sir, I think we need to talk about our new coffee service employee." Speaking of high-pressure situations, modern military personnel rely on advanced medical monitoring technology to track vital signs during intense operations. Wearable health devices with military-grade sensors can detect stress levels, heart rate variability, and even predict potential medical emergencies before they happen. These sophisticated systems use encrypted data transmission and can operate in extreme conditions from desert heat to Arctic cold. The same technology originally developed for special operations forces is now becoming available for civilian emergency responders and high-risk professionals who need reliable health monitoring in demanding environments. Back in the break room, Ivy had retreated to the far corner, trying to make herself invisible, but the damage was done. The 5 SEALs were now watching her with new eyes, their earlier mockery replaced by confused suspicion. "I'm going to find out who you are," Connor said, his voice lacking its earlier cruelty, but filled with determination instead. "I don't know what your deal is, but we're going to figure it out." Ivy said nothing. She finished setting up the coffee station and left the break room as quickly as possible, but she could feel their eyes on her back the entire way. Later that afternoon, Bradley called Ivy into the briefing room. She entered with her head down, hands clasped in front of her, like she was expecting to be disciplined. Charlotte Warner was there, along with Captain Mitchell. The presence of higher authority made Ivy's shoulders draw up even tighter. "Sit down," Bradley said, gesturing to a chair. Ivy sat perching on the edge of the seat like she might need to run at any moment. "Where did you learn to assemble a weapon like that?" Bradley asked directly. "My father, sir." Ivy's voice was steady, but her hands gripped the edges of her chair. "What was his name?" "James Sterling, sir." What unit? He didn't talk about his service much, sir. Bradley leaned forward. Miss Sterling, I've been in special operations for 7 years. I know what trained competence looks like. What you did this morning, that wasn't something a father teaches his daughter for fun. That was professional level skill. Ivy said nothing. Charlotte spoke up. We ran your background check. It's clean. Too clean, actually. There's nothing in your history that explains your capabilities. I don't understand what you mean, ma'am, Ivy said quietly. Captain Mitchell, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. Miss Sterling, we're not trying to get you in trouble, but this is a secure facility. We need to understand who we're allowing into restricted areas. If there's something in your background you haven't disclosed, now would be the time to tell us. Ivy met his eyes for the first time, and Captain Mitchell saw something there that surprised him. Not fear, not guilt, but a deep bone-tired resignation, like she'd known this moment was coming and had been dreading it. There's nothing to tell, sir, she said. I'm just trying to do my job. The three of them pressed her for another 20 minutes, but Ivy gave them nothing. Same story, same quiet responses, same downcast eyes. Eventually, Captain Mitchell dismissed her, but as she left, he exchanged a significant look with Charlotte. Find out who she really is, he said quietly. Use whatever resources you need. Charlotte nodded. She had a feeling she was going to need them. Over the next 2 days, the story of Ivy's weapon assembly spread through the compound like wildfire. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her. SEALs and support staff alike watched her move through the halls, trying to reconcile the timid, scared woman with the impossibly skilled hands. Mason, Ethan, and Connor took to following her at a distance, watching everything she did. They noticed things, small things. The way she automatically checked corners before turning down a hallway. The way she never sat with her back to a door. The way her eyes constantly scanned her environment, tracking movement and threats with unconscious precision. She moves like us, Mason said to Connor one evening as they watched Ivy leave the building. Did you see how she cleared that doorway, sliced the pie perfectly? Connor had seen it. He'd also seen the way Ivy maintained situational awareness, even when she thought no one was watching. It was subtle, but it was there, the constant vigilance that marked someone who'd operated in hostile environments. On the third day, Ivy was cleaning the equipment room when Connor found her alone. He'd been waiting for this opportunity, and he took it. He walked up behind her quietly and grabbed her arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to startle. We need to talk, he said. Who are you really? The response was instantaneous and terrifying. Ivy's free hand shot toward Connor's elbow, her body already pivoting into what he immediately recognized as a disarm position. Her stance dropped her weight, shifted, her eyes went hard and focused. For one fraction of a second, Connor was staring at someone completely different, not a scared civilian, an operator. Then Ivy caught herself. The hardness vanished from her eyes. She jerked away from Connor and backed up against the wall, breathing hard, hands trembling again. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Connor stared at his arm, where her hand had almost completed the disarm sequence. His heart was pounding. He'd trained with some of the best martial artists in the world, and he'd recognized that move. It was a Krav Maga modified with what looked like elements of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, advanced technique, the kind that took years to make reflexive. Who are you? Connor whispered. Ivy shook her head, tears starting to form in her eyes. Please just leave me alone. She pushed past him and ran from the room. Connor stood there for a long moment, his mind reeling. Then he pulled out his phone and called Bradley. We need to meet, now, all of us, because this is bigger than we thought. An hour later, the 4 SEALs sat in Bradley's quarters. Connor recounted what had happened in the equipment room, demonstrating the disarm sequence Ivy had almost completed. That's not basic self-defense, Bradley said grimly. That's high-level combatives, the kind we learn in advanced training. So who is she? Mason demanded. Former Army Marines. Charlotte's still digging, Bradley said. But she found something interesting. Ivy's fingerprints show up in an access log for the weapons locker in Building 7 from 3 years ago. Ethan sat up straighter. Building 7 requires Tier 2 clearance minimum. Contractors don't have that. Exactly? Bradley's expression was grim. Which means either there's a mistake in the system or Ivy Sterling had security clearance we don't know about. We need to push harder, Connor said. Confront her directly. Make her tell us the truth. Or we could wait and watch, Bradley countered. See what else she reveals. If she's hiding something, she'll slip up again. They decided to wait, but they didn't have to wait long. If you're starting to see the clues I'm dropping here, you already know something big is coming. Smash that like button if you're as curious as I am about what's really going on with Ivy. The next few minutes are gonna blow your mind. Stay with me. The best part is still ahead. The following morning, the compound held a routine emergency evacuation drill. The alarm sounded at 0830 hours, a loud klaxon that sent personnel streaming toward the designated assembly points. Ivy was in the break room when it happened, and she moved with everyone else toward the exits. But Matthew Sullivan was watching. He'd been watching for days now, collecting observations, building a picture. And what he saw during that evacuation drill confirmed every suspicion he'd been harboring. Ivy didn't just evacuate, she assessed. Her eyes tracked the flow of personnel, counting heads, noting bottlenecks. She positioned herself near the exit with clear sightlines to both the main door and the emergency exit. When a young recruit stumbled, Ivy was there instantly steadying him with a firm grip that spoke of confidence and strength she'd been hiding. Matthew pulled out his phone and started recording. He captured Ivy scanning the perimeter of the assembly area. He caught the moment when she identified the ranking officer present and automatically positioned herself for clear line of sight. He documented the way she maintained a 20-foot security perimeter without even seeming aware she was doing it. This wasn't learned behavior from a father who served. This was ingrained tactical awareness, the kind that only came from operations, real operations. When the drill ended and personnel began filtering back inside, Matthew approached Captain Mitchell. "Sir, you need to see this." In Captain Mitchell's office, they watched the video together. The captain's expression grew progressively more serious as the footage played. "That's not civilian behavior," he said quietly. "No, sir, it's not." Matthew replayed a section where Ivy had automatically established a defensive position. "That's operator-level situational awareness. I've seen it 1,000 times. Hell, I do it myself without thinking. But she's supposed to be a coffee service contractor." Captain Mitchell picked up his phone and called Commander Daniel Cross, the officer who had originally been skeptical about the whole situation. "Daniel, I need you to come to my office and bring your JSOS access codes. We're going to need them." Commander Cross arrived within 15 minutes. He watched the video, his expression growing darker with each second. "This doesn't make sense. If she's former military with this level of training, it would show up in a standard background check." "Unless it's classified," Charlotte Warner said from the doorway. She'd been summoned as well and had brought her laptop. "Sir, I've been trying to access deeper records, but I keep hitting walls. Classified designations, redacted files. I've never seen a civilian contractor's background this locked down." Commander Cross moved to Charlotte's laptop. He entered his access codes, navigating through layers of security protocols. "Let's see what we're really dealing with here." The search took 5 minutes. When the results finally loaded, Commander Cross's face went pale. "Oh my God!" "What?" Captain Mitchell demanded. "What did you find?" "There's a file." Commander Cross's voice was tight. "JSOC restricted. It's heavily redacted, but I can see a call sign. Ghost. And it's flagged with a designation I've only seen on a handful of files in my entire career." "What designation?" Matthew asked. Commander Cross looked up at them, his expression a mixture of shock and something close to awe. "Kill on sight. She's marked kill on sight by multiple hostile organizations." The room fell silent. Kill on sight designations were extremely rare. They were reserved for operators who'd caused so much damage to enemy organizations that they'd become priority targets. Having that designation meant you'd operated at the highest levels. It meant you'd taken down high-value targets. It meant you were in the most literal sense a threat that enemy leaders wanted eliminated at any cost. "But that doesn't make sense," Bradley said. "KOS designations are public among Allied forces. We'd know if there was a female operator with that status. There are only about 20 people in the world with that designation." "Unless she's retired and in hiding," Charlotte said slowly. "If she's trying to live a civilian life, she'd need to stay off the radar. The last thing she'd want is attention." Captain Mitchell stared at the screen. "We need full access to that file, whatever it takes." "That's going to require Admiral-level clearance," Commander Cross said. "I don't have the authorization." "Then we get the Admiral." Captain Mitchell reached for his phone. Because if we have a Tier 1 operator working as a coffee server on this base, I need to know why, and I need to know now. The pieces were starting to come together, but the full picture was still hidden. Hidden behind layers of classification, behind Ivy's carefully maintained disguise, behind the scars she wore like armor, and the weakness she projected like camouflage. But the truth was coming. In the hallways of the compound, in the classified databases being accessed by officers with growing alarm, in the suspicious eyes of the SEALs who'd mocked her, the truth was rising like a wave. And when it broke, nothing would be the same. That evening, Ivy sat alone in her small apartment off base, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The scars on her arm seemed to pulse in the dim light. Each one told a story. Each one marked a moment when she'd survived something that should have killed her. She'd known this day would come, known that eventually someone would see past the disguise. She'd hoped for more time, time to heal, time to forget, time to become someone other than Ghost, the operator who'd eliminated 3 high-value targets in a single operation. The operator who'd survived an IED blast that had killed her spotter and wounded 2 other team members. The operator who'd pulled all 3 of them out of the kill zone with a fractured spine and a punctured lung. She touched the scars gently. These weren't marks of weakness. They were proof she'd survived, but survival came with a price. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way her hands shook when she wasn't actively focusing on controlling them. PTSD didn't care that you were tough. It didn't care that you'd been one of the best. It broke you down just the same. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. They're digging. You knew this would happen. Time to decide. Ivy stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. She wasn't ready to decide. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the choice was being taken out of her hands. Forces were in motion now that she couldn't stop. The investigation was accelerating. The questions were becoming more pointed. And tomorrow, Admiral Joshua Barrett himself was scheduled to visit the compound for a routine inspection. Except, it wouldn't be routine. Ivy knew exactly what was going to happen. The Admiral would be briefed on the mystery surrounding her. He'd access her file. He'd see the designation. He'd understand what it meant. And then everything she'd been running from would catch up to her in a single devastating moment. Ivy stood in front of the mirror for another minute, looking at the woman reflected there, scared, broken, trying so hard to be normal. Then she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and looked again. For just a second, another woman looked back, strong, lethal, unbreakable, Ghost. The next morning came too quickly. Ivy reported to the compound at her usual time, knowing that today would be different. She could feel it in the air, in the way personnel looked at her, in the increased security presence around the buildings. Admiral Barrett was coming, and with him the end of her carefully constructed disguise. She went through her morning routine on autopilot, setting up the coffee station, wiping down the counters, arranging the cups. But her hands were steadier today, because she knew the waiting was almost over. At 0900 hours, Admiral Barrett arrived. He was 58 years old, distinguished with the bearing of a man who'd spent his entire life in service. He conducted his inspection with Charlotte, Warner, and Captain Mitchell, accompanying him, reviewing operations, checking on personnel, ensuring the compound maintained the highest standards. But the real